Hi, I'm Dave, back with another demo, and today I've got a colleague of mine, Marius, with me. So one of my customers asked for this demo, and Marius is the guy that helped me to create it and work out how it works and all that kind of stuff. So what the customer wanted to do is connect from Power BI to a graph database running in Cosmos DB with the Gremlin API. So what we've done is we've created a graph database. So we're going to have authors in the database. We're going to have a single collection with the authors. We're going to have some books in that database. We're going to create edges between the authors and the books to say that the author wrote the book. And then we're also going to have a reviewer, and we're going to create an edge to say a reviewer reviewed a book. So this is a visual representation of that. Obviously in the collection this is just a bunch of JSON files, and then we interpret that when we read it. And then Marius will talk us through how that's going to come through into the PBI environment.
Right. So in Cosmos DB we already have a nice graph visualization where we can see all this, we can see the vertices, we can see the edges, and it's all nice. What we want to do is do the same thing within Power BI. And what we're going to do is a custom visual from the Power BI marketplace that basically replicates that nice graph visualization. In order to create this and make it work, we're going to have a really small data model behind the scenes that's going to have 3 tables, 2 that will store the vertices and 1 that stores the edges that connects the 2 vertices. 1 will be the from vertex, 1 will be the to vertex. So just to give you a hypothetical example, assume the author is George R.R. Martin. He wrote Game of Thrones. So vertex number 1 would be George R.R. Martin, the edge would be wrote, and then vertex number 2 would be Game of Thrones. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to write 3 queries to the Cosmos DB Gremlin API, querying the same collection 3 times and populating our 3 individual tables in order to enable all this.
Cool. So this is quite a straightforward, simple demo. It shouldn't take too long. Once you've watched it, if you enjoyed it, please go down below and put some comments in there. Ask for future demos if you've got any ideas. But also hit that like button and also subscribe if you enjoy the channel so you get to see videos in the future. We're trying to get to 100 subscriptions so that we can get a custom name for the channel on YouTube. Thanks for watching. So first we're going to create a Cosmos DB instance. Do a search in the new resource list for Cosmos and choose Azure Cosmos DB and then click create. And then select the subscription you want to put it in, and in this instance we're going to create a resource group as part of the new Cosmos dialog. So give it a unique account name, so this is DNS based, so it's got to be lowercase and unique. And we're going to choose Gremlin Graph as the database type. Doesn't really matter what the location is for this demo. Disable geo-redundancy and multi-region rights, it just keeps the cost down for the demo. And then once validation is complete, we're going to click create. So now we're going to create a storage account, so just search for storage and then click on storage account and create. Then once we get through to the dialog, select the correct subscription and resource group, give the storage account a unique name. Again, this is DNS name, so it has to be truly unique. Drop it down to locally redundant storage to save costs on the demo, and click create. So now we're going to configure the storage account. So click on your Gremlin storage. And in here we're going to go to blobs and create a container called icons and set that to blob access level so that the files that we put here are publicly accessible. Then go into that container and browse for your 2 icon files that you're going to need, one for an author, one for a book. Just find these on Google. Make sure that they're both in the same format, so here I'm going with .png. This is because the URL is going to be a generic one, and Power BI is just going to replace that author with whatever the name of the type is. So we can have as many types as we want, and here we've got author and book. but the first part of the URL and the extension are going to be the same, so Power BI is going to be able to access this nicely. And next we're going to get Notepad, click on one of the files, and we're just going to copy out this URL because we're going to need that back again later once we're in Power BI. So copy that there, and then go into Notepad, paste it in, and we're just going to chop it in half, so remove the piece at the end after the last / and delete that name because that's going to be replaced by Power BI. So next we're going to create the Cosmos database. So click on Cosmos on the instance you've created, and then we'll go to Data Explorer, and in Data Explorer we'll then click on New Database. Give the database a name, so in this instance we're calling it Books, and click OK. And then we're going to click on that Books database and select New Graph. You can do this all in one if you just click New Graph. We're going to call this collection Book Collection, just to keep it nice and easy. The partition key is going to be /name, quite a basic partitioning here. So you also want to change the throughput to 400 to reduce the costs. In this case that's more than half the costs because our default was 1000, 400 being the minimum. So then we're going to click on the book collection, go to Graph, and this is where we do our Gremlin queries. Obviously you can also use the external API to do Gremlin queries, but in this instance we're going to do everything from within the Azure interface. Just because it's a demo, there's no need for external stuff. So we've executed a query, seen that there's nothing in the database, and now we've clicked New Vertex and adding an author, so in this instance J.R.R. Tolkien, and we're going to add another property of gender, and he's a male obviously. Click OK. That adds our first vertex. Quite often these are called nodes by people that are interchangeably used. So if we re-execute the query we can then see that that object has been created. So off screen I'm copying these queries in from the instructions on GitHub. So here this is a single query, single line to add in the new author J.K. Rowling. And we're just going to rerun that general g.v query to show we've now got the two objects. So you could sit here and manually create individual objects, nodes, vertices, whatever you want to call them, or you can move on to the next query in that instructions, which is a multi-line query, the first line having g dot and the following line is not. So in this instance we're adding another author, which is Luke Reinhardt, who wrote The Dice Man. And then the next query is going to add some books. So in this case the Harry Potter series. This is a multi-line query adding all of those books in. Then if we refresh again, just to show all of the items in the collection, we can see all of the books and the three authors. And the reason that we're adding the Harry Potter books separately and the Tolkien books in separately is just the way that these multi-line queries work, that you're selecting an author all at once. So we're just putting all those books in by author. And now we're going to add our first edge. So we're going to choose J.R.R. Tolkien. The drop down there lets us choose The Hobbit, which is one of the books we've just added, and the edge label is just going to be wrote. So Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, and we're going to click the tick to acknowledge that. That gives us our first edge. You can see on the graph there has just appeared. Tolkien and The Hobbit are now linked. And then the next query is going to add in a bunch more edges. This is for all of Tolkien's books. So once we refresh this query with g.v, then we'll see Tolkien in the middle with the 4 books that we've entered there. and each of the books has got a page count rather than agenda. So we're showing really that we've got that NoSQL schema-free database here. So here we're adding Luke Reinhardt knows J.K. Rowling and things like that, just to show the flexibility of the graph database and to give us something interesting to look at later on. So if we click Luke Reinhardt now, then we can see that Luke has read The Two Towers. He also knows J.K. Rowling, and he's also written The Dice Man and The Return of the Dice Man. And this is kind of the purpose of these graph databases, is to show those relationships between objects, arbitrary objects. And we can keep adding different objects, so we could put reviewers in here, we could put magazines in here. So that's our data filled in. We now have a nice rich data set that we can use for the Power BI section of the demo. So now over in Power BI, we're going to add in a custom visualization. There aren't any by default in Power BI, so we're just going to go off to the marketplace and do a search. So this one is a Microsoft visualization. It's force directed graph, that one at the top there, and we're going to add that in, and this just shows the relationships between objects. So once that's added in, we'll drag one onto the designer and then move on to getting our data. So I'm going to click Get Data, and then we're going to search for the Cosmos connector. So this is currently in beta. At some point this year, that's going to drop out of beta. So I don't tick this box to stop warning me, because it's good to know when you're using beta software. So it's nice to have that pop up every time, even though you have to then clear it every time. So for the connection, take the .NET SDK URL, not the Gremlin endpoint. So the Gremlin endpoint is for submitting Gremlin API calls specifically, and the connector doesn't use those. So next we're going to go to the Data Explorer just to double check that database name. For the demo, we've only just created it, but here, you know, often you'll have forgotten what that is, or you just need to check it. So type in the database name. You can also put a collection in there. I haven't in this instance, and just click OK. And then we need the account key. So back into the Azure portal, click on keys under your Cosmos, and then it'll show you those keys. I've blurred these out so that you're not able to see my keys, even though I'll destroy this environment later. So paste that in and click connect, and you should then be connected and retrieve some data. Take the book collection, and although that's not the data that's in there that you're used to, that is correct. So click OK and load. So what's happening is each record there is a JSON document that lives in the document database. And we're now going to work in Power BI to split those out into actual information that we're looking for. So from here, we're going to click onto Edit Queries and do a bit of advanced editing just for the benefit of the demo. So normally you might have put a query in as you were configuring that. Here, we're just going to paste in the queries from the demo instructions, because I've created those and tested those. So first we're going to duplicate, so we're going to have nodes 1 and we're going to have edges. So this just means that we've got the same query in twice as a good starting place. You can go back and use a recent source and create a second one. It doesn't make any difference. So here's the query that you get by default, and I've copied them into Notepad from the documentation, and this is the Cosmos DB URI that we got from Cosmos a moment ago for connectivity. Make sure that you replace that in the query, because otherwise you might try and connect to someone else's database and things would fail. So in here you can see there's a query in there just going select star from authors A. Authors isn't a table or anything, it's a construct that we use in this type of query as a sort of placeholder, so we're casting that information into a table called authors. And this second one, we're doing the same thing, but we're selecting where e dot underscore is edge is true. So this is just returning all the edges into a virtual table called edges. Next, we need to expand out on that button at the top. Always click select more because it usually doesn't return everything on first go. And the documentation will tell you which ones we're ticking here. It's probably going by a bit quick, but we don't need all of the sort of background information that's from the database. On the nodes one, click load more because we need gender and pages, and by default Power BI won't go in and check all of the records, so we need to make sure it's gone and done that. So we're going to again tick the ones that we actually need and OK to that. And then we need to further expand the pages and the gender just due to the structure of that data. So select the value, we see the page counts for those books, and then we expand the gender and tick value, and we'll see the genders of the authors. And that's our data selected. We're then going to just filter to get just authors and books. So this had returned all of the edges as well. I didn't write the query such that it was only returning one. We're then going to duplicate the nodes 1 and call it nodes 2 because we need 2 copies of this, one on either side of that query. So we've got a source and a sink. So by default in here the relationships are going to be wrong, and that's because each of the 3 tables has a document.name, and those are unique in each, so the connections wouldn't be valid. So we'll just delete those relationships. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect the vertex ID to document ID on one side, and vertex ID is just the source of an edge. And then we're going to connect the document.sync to the document ID on the other node table, and that's our sync obviously. And what this does is it allows us to have a many-to-one relationship, but in 2 directions from 2 different sources. So then we're just going to rename the tables, and I'm going to speed this section up because you don't need to watch me renaming tables really slowly, but you may want to pause at the end just to see the final names that I've used. This is just to make them easier to identify in the visualizations, so you don't need to do this step if you can remember which is which. So now we're going to configure the visualization. So just make it a bit bigger in the window, and then we're going to start dragging the data onto it. So initially we want the edge name or the edge label in link type, and then node 1 name and node 2 name go in the source and targets, and we can see the data has just appeared there for the books and the authors. I'll tidy this up again in a minute. And then we need to fill in the source and target types, so we'll drop the node labels into those, and that just gives us the information that they are authors and books. So then on the settings we're going to go to nodes and turn on images. We'll copy out the blob URI that we had earlier. That's that first half for the icons. Paste that in, and obviously it already says .png, so we don't need to change that. And you can see that it's just gone on the internet and downloaded those icons that we put into blob. We'll also change the max name to 50 because some of these are quite long titles. And then we'll turn on labels and arrows for the relationships so that we can now see the direction of the edges. So J.R.R. Tolkien wrote a book, and you can see the arrow is in that direction. And now we've got the visualization there. You can use filters, you can click on things to highlight the relationships, and you can move stuff about and watch it redraw as things happen. finally, just a shout out that SQLBits 2019 is coming up on the 27th of February to the 2nd of March 2019 up in Manchester in the UK at Manchester Central. There's going to be loads of people from Microsoft in the US coming across to explain the latest things about the products. There's loads of partners coming along, and there's a great party atmosphere after hours, so hopefully I will see you there.